was, I think people would be much better off without false consolation, and I don't want them trying to inflict their beliefs on me. So they'd be doing themselves and me a favor if they gave it up. So perhaps in that sense I contradict myself. I mean, I wish they would stop it, but then I would be left with no one to argue with.
But you have many other subjects.
And I certainly didn't say that I thought if they'd only listened to me they would stop going. Okay, so there are two questions here. So that was my very experimental answer. But I'd love to hear, would you like to say that you look forward to a world when no one had any faith in the
I want to answer this. Whether it's astrology or religion or anything else, I want to live in a world where people think skeptically for themselves, look at evidence, not because astrology is harmful, I guess it probably isn't harmful, but if you go through the world thinking that it's okay to just believe things because you believe them without evidence, then you're missing so much. And it's such a wonderful experience to live in the world and understand why you're living in the world and understand what makes it work, understand about the real stars, understand about astronomy, that it's an impoverishing thing to be reduced to the pettiness of astrology. And I think you can say the same of religion. The universe is a grand, beautiful, wonderful place. And it's petty and parochial and cheapening to believe in jinns and supernatural creators and supernatural interferers. I think you could make an aesthetic case that we want to get rid of.
Fine. I could not possibly agree with you more.
But let's talk about priorities.
Okay.
If we could just get rid of some of the most pernicious and noxious excesses, what would be the triumphs you would go for first? What would really thrill you as an objective reached? Let's look at Islam, and let's look at Islam as realistically as we can. Is there any remote chance of a reformed, reasonable Islam?
Well, isn't the present savage Islam actually rather recent? Isn't it the Wahhabi?
You have to go back quite a ways, I think, to get
only up to a point. I mean, I think there's, and again, none of us are whether we're equipped to do it, we're not the most persuasive mouthpieces of this criticism. I mean, it takes someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali or a Muslim scholar, someone like Ibn Waraq, to authentically criticize Islam and have it be heard by people, but especially the secular liberals of a sort who don't trust our take on this. But it seems to me you have different historical moments in the history of Islam that are distinct. One where Islam really has you have some Muslim, you have a caliphate, or you have some Muslim country which has a reign of Islam and is unmolested, but for whatever period of time from the outside, and then Islam can be as totalitarian and happy with itself as possible, and you don't see the inherent conflict and the inherent liability of its creed. I mean, Samuel Huntington said Islam has bloody borders. It's at the borders that we're noticing this problem, and the borders of Islam and modernity at this moment, the conflict between Islam and modernity. But yes, you can find instances in the history of Islam where people weren't running around waging jihad because they had successfully waged jihad.
But then
but what about women in that
exactly,
world?
the suffering of women within those borders.
Even in the best of times.
But there's also there's obviously some kind of syncretism, and we know quite a lot now. There have been some wonderful books, Maria Monaco's book on Andalusia, for example, on periods where Islamic civilization was relatively at peace with its neighbors and doing a lot of work of its own on matters that were not jihadist. And I saw myself during the wars in post-Yugoslavia that the Bosnian Muslims behaved far better than the Christians, either Catholic or Orthodox, and were the victims of religious massacre and not the perpetrators of them, and were the ones who believed the most in multiculturalism. So it can happen. You could even meet people who said they were atheist Muslims or Muslim atheists,
Wow.
Muslim secularists in
Bosnia?
in Sarajevo. You could, yeah. Which is
Well, you
which is
certainly
a
couldn't.
technical impossibility. But
Right.
the problem is this: whether we think, as I certainly very firmly do believe, that totalitarianism is innate in all religion, because it has to want an absolute, unchallengeable, eternal authority.
In all religion.
Must be so. The creator whose will can't, our comments on his will are unimportant. You know, his will is absolute. It cannot be challenged, and applies after we're dead as well as before we're born. I mean, that is the origin of totalitarianism. I think Islam states that in the most alarming way, in that it comes as the third of the monotheisms and says nothing further is required.
Right.
This is the last. There have been previous words from God, we admit that. We don't claim to be exclusive, but we do claim to be final.
Yeah.
There's no need for any further work on this point.
And we do claim that there's no
is
distance
the
between
worst
theology
thing,
and
in our
civics.
world, surely the worst thing anyone can say is no further inquiry is needed.
Right.
You've already got all you need to know. All else is commentary. That's the most sinister and dangerous thing. And that is a claim that Islam makes that others don't quite make in the same way.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a
After all,
moment on that
there's no
point.
refutation of Islam in Christianity or Judaism, but there is in Islam. Let's say we accept all the bad bits of Judaism. We love Abraham and his sacrifice of his son, or willingness to sacrifice.
Yeah.
We love all that. We absolutely esteem the virgin birth, the most nonsensical bits of Christianity. We think, all that's great. You're all welcome to join, but we have the final word.
Right.
That's deadly.
Yes.
And I think our existence is incompatible with that preaching.
Let me just play devil's advocate for a moment, so at least we're clear what the position is.
I'd rather speak for the devil pro bono myself.
Well, okay. We can all speak for the devil. I'm sure a lot of people think we're doing just that. I, for one, think that the fact that something is true is not quite sufficient for spreading it about or for trying to discover it. The idea that there's things we should just not try to find out is an idea that I take seriously. And I think we at least have to examine the proposition that there's such a thing as knowing more than's good for us. Now, if you accept that so far, then a possibility we have to take seriously, even when we reject it, we should reject it having taken it seriously, is the Muslim idea that indeed the West has simply gone way too far, that there is lots of, this is knowledge that's not good for us, it's knowledge that we were better off with that, and the fact that many Muslims would like to turn the clock back, they can't, of course. But I have a certain sympathy for a Muslim who says, well, yeah, the cat's out of the bag, it's too late, it's a tragedy. You in the West have exposed truths to yourselves, and now you're forcing them on us, that the species would be better off not knowing.
I'm absolutely riveted by what you say. I'd really love an instance, in theory or practice, of something you think we could know but could forbid ourselves to know. Because that is harder for me to imagine in a world without faith, I must say.
Well, you brought up the bell curve. I mean, if there
Yes.
were reliable differences in intelligences between races or species,
But I don't think any of us here
genders.
do think that that's the case. I mean, I think there must be something, you must have thought of something you could believe but wish you didn't know.
Oh, I don't think it's hard to dream up things which, if they were true, it might be better for the human race to go on not knowing them.
But could you
want-
concretize it just a
No,
little
but-
more? I'm completely fascinated.
I mean, the hypothetical is one thing, but Christopher's asking, do you actually,
Was there
have you
something in
ever
mind?
suppressed something? That,
No, I haven't.
No.
Can you imagine yourself doing so, by the way? I mean, I can't.
Oh, I can imagine it. I hope it never comes up.
Well,
But-
take the synthesizing of bioweapons. I mean, what should nature publish the code for smallpox, where you can just anyone
okay.
within his
exactly.
lab can
There's all those
cook
sorts
it
of
up.
Oh, well, all right. But that wouldn't be a knowledge of which we should remain innocent.
Well,
That would, be
I think-
that would be more like a
I
capacity.
think with foresight, it's certainly you can conceive of a circumstance where someone can seek knowledge, the only conceivable application of which would be unethical, or the dissemination of which would put power in the wrong hands, or
Yes.
I mean, but actually, you brought up something which I think is crucial here, because it's not so much the spread of the seditious truths to Islam or the rest of the world that I think we're guilty of in the eyes of our opponents. It's the not honoring of facts that are not easily quantified and easily discussed in science. I mean, the classic retort to all of us is, prove to me that you love your wife. I mean, as though this is a knockdown argument against atheism. You can't prove it. Well, if you unpack that a little bit, you can prove it. You can demonstrate it. We know what we mean by love. But there is this domain of the sacred that is not easily captured by science, and scientific discourse has really ceded it to religious discourse historically.
Well, and artistic discourse.
Yeah,
which is not religious necessarily.
But I would argue it's not even well captured by art necessarily. There's something in the same way that love is not really well captured by art, and compassion is not. Well, I mean, you can represent it in art, but it's not reducible to. You don't go into the museum and find compassion in its purest form. And I think there's something about the way we, as atheists, merely dismiss the bogus claims of religious people that convinces religious people that there's something we're missing. And I think we have to be sensitive to this.
Absolutely. That's why they bring up, what about when has secularism ever built anything like Durham Cathedral, or Chartres, or devotional painting, or the music of
Bach?
But I think we have answers to that. I think we have answers to that. I mean, and you provide a very good answer to that. If there was secular patronage of the arts at that point, then one, we can't know that Michelangelo was actually a believer, because the consequences of professing your unbelief in that case was death. But two, if we had a secular organization
to commission Michelangelo,
we would have all that secular artwork.
Though, I didn't actually say that the corollary held.
Which?
I think it's true we can't know with devotional painting and sculpture and architecture that the patronage didn't have a lot to do with it. But I can't hear myself saying, if only you had a secular painter, you'd have done just as good work.
Oh, no, I think I'm fusing you and Richard there.
I think I can't, I don't know why, and I'm quite happy to find that I don't know why. I can't quite hear myself saying
that Michelangelo, if he'd been commissioned to do the ceiling of a museum of science, wouldn't have produced something just as wonderful.
In some way, I'm reluctant to affirm that, yes.
I find it very, very easy to believe that.
That could be a difference between us. I mean, with devotional poetry, where I do think, I don't know very much about painting or architecture or music, but, and some devotional architecture, like say St. Peter's, it
couldn't be done.
I don't like any way. And knowing that it was built by a special sale of indulgences doesn't help either. With devotional poetry, like that of, say, John Donne or George Herbert, I find it very hard to imagine that it's faked or done for a patron. I mean,
yes, I think that's
it would be very improbable people would write poetry like that.
But could it be done in the
spirit of reason? To please anyone? Well, I frankly think that's the only explanation.
But in any case, what conclusion would you draw? I mean, if Donne's devotional poetry is wonderful, so what? I mean, it doesn't show that it represents truth in any sense.
Not in the least. Well, my favourite devotional poem is Philip Larkin's Churchgoing, one of the best poems ever written. It exactly expresses. I wish I had it here. Well, actually, I do have it here. If you like, I can read it. But I wouldn't trust anyone who believed any more or any less than Larkin does when he goes to a wayside Gothic church in the English countryside. Who felt, I don't say believed, I shouldn't say believed, who felt any more than he does. He's an atheist. Or who felt any less, that there's something serious about this.
All right, but...
And something written into the human personality and as well as the landscape.
Well, this brings us back to your
I don't see that this is anything other than a special case. It says nothing
about the truth of religion.
I don't think this is see how this is anything other than a special case. Other special cases of which would be you just couldn't, I can't think of a perfect example of this, only by being lost at sea for 2 years in a boat and then surviving that. That's the only way you could conceivably have written this account. It could not be fiction.
Or quit smoking.
And it's glorious.